Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes to discuss how I think the innovation is likely to change your anesthesia practice in the near future. First, just give some disclosures which relate to my work in editorial boards. Now, things are advancing very, very quickly. I think that's pretty obvious to us all now. You can see that the so-called knowledge doubling curve has gone from about once every 100 years to in some areas now where it could be weeks, days, and perhaps even hours. From the days of that ether dome that we saw in the first slide, even in the last 20, 30 years, anesthesia mortality has dropped significantly. You can see here, this is data from Australia where they keep very good records of this. And you can see that anesthesia now is very, very safe. So anesthesia is safe, but unfortunately, the whole process of having surgery can still be dangerous. And of course, we do have a role to play in that. And that's why you see the development of organizations such as evidence-based perioperative medicine. And this brings me to, I think, probably one of the most important points about the development of our specialty. I think we need to develop, and we already are developing ourselves as perioperative physicians, but this really is the future. If we don't take the lead in this area, and it is a very important area, then others are standing by ready to do so. So I think this is something that will be extremely important for all of us. And we already have been working in this field, so developing anaesthetists have been instrumental in developing things such as enhanced recovery programs after surgery, which have been important in improving the value of healthcare as well as the safety of healthcare. We have electronic record keeping, which can now get to the stage where we can use it for things like automatically giving us risk assessment. So this is an electronic record from my own hospital, and now we have data which comes into our record from various different sources, biochemistry, hematology, and so forth, which helps us to calculate things like relative mortality risks, morbidity risks, and so on, to help in our surgical planning and discussions with patients. So this is an area I think that's going to become more and more widespread as well. When we apply new technology, we want to think why we're doing it and what we can actually achieve by doing it. Can we do things better than we're already doing it? A good example, I think, is robotics. And 25 years ago, there was a lot of skepticism about robotics in medicine. And you can see from this cartoon with Windows 95 that things could go very badly wrong. And yet robotics has become an integral part of surgical care now, and has been become into all sorts of different areas, you know, orthopedic joint replacement, hepatectomy, and so on. Now, there are all sorts of areas where robotics is becoming important and is likely to supersede the handheld device. Robotics also coming into anesthesia. An obvious area would be airway management. It still looks a little bit crude. Some of the devices have been developed, but others such as the Magellan for regional anesthesia is becoming more widespread, and I think actually could be very useful as the technology improves in that area. Things like point of care ultrasound, I mean, it's going to get to the stage where you're more likely to see somebody carrying a handheld ultrasound device in their pocket now than a stethoscope. And for obvious reasons, it can be used in many different areas, not just for auscultation, but also for things like regional anesthesia, intravascular access, and so on. TIVA, I think, is an important technique, and I think there are very clear advantages of propofol intravenous anesthesia, and yet it's still not that widely used. But there are developments occurring in our specialty which are likely to make that a bigger area. I think, for example, the greater interest in environmental sustainability and the knowledge that certain inhalational anesthetics, particularly desflurane, are very detrimental to the environment. For example, using desflurane anesthesia for 1 Mach at 2 liters of fresh gas flow is equivalent in the CO2 warming potential of driving a medium-sized car from Paris to Prague, where we all would like to be at the moment, but we're unfortunately not. Cancer surgery is another area where propofol is developing some interest, because we know that from basic science data that propofol does have anti-tumour properties, and some retrospective, powerful retrospective data would suggest that this is borne out in the clinical setting as well. This is the study by Wigmore and colleagues showing a reduction in mortality from surgery and recurrence of cancer in patients who received TIVA as opposed to inhalational anesthesia. And there are prospective trials ongoing in this area, so this is something in the near future we should see more of. There will be better models. Instead of having a totally confused infusion, we now have the Eleveld PK model, which is a so-called general purpose model. Now, this is very important because now you just have one model which suits every type of patient. We don't need to choose a different model for a different patient, for a different size, for a different age. We have one model now which works extremely well in all sorts of different patient populations, includes things like allometric scaling and so on. So I think this will make the use of propofol TCI just like using a vaporizer, and that will make it easier for people to adopt this as a standard technique. We also have propofol monitoring system technology, and the commercial systems are now in the pipeline. What about closed loop control? People often think about this in terms of future development of anesthesia. Well, the problem with closed loop control is it really can only be as good or reliable as the information that's being put into it. So that's obviously quite easy for things like blood pressure or glycemic control. But I think that our current processed EEG and nociception monitoring is really not good enough to make this a reliable technique. There may well be advances occurring in this kind of technology for monitoring, and once we get that, then we may well see some closed loop control. What about drug development? Well, drugs are no longer really developed serendipitously or accidentally. They're really planned, and it's a very high risk area. From 5 to 10,000 compounds, you may only get one FDA approved drug. So it's an expensive and difficult area to develop, and we have to think about what sort of new drugs we would like to have and how important they may be for us. So, for example, the thought of producing very, very short-acting drugs, I think may not be all that useful, because we already have a drug in propofol which has a pretty rapid offset, but also is a very smooth offset as well. So may not be any advantage in these kind of new drugs. And remember also that anesthetic drugs may also have non-anesthetic effects, which could be important. And propofol is actually a very good example of that in terms of its organ protection and free radical scavenging and so on. Existing technology used with drugs may be applied to other existing drugs. So this is an example here with remifentanil with its esterase cleavage and ultra short duration of action. This has been used to modify ketamine to make non-psychomimetic ketamine analogs and rapidly metabolized ultra short acting ketamine drugs, which may be useful in clinical practice because they would not have the kind of hangover effects that we may see when we're using ketamine in normal practice. Remimidazole, of course, is fairly well known, and it's already available in a number of countries. Can be used for induction and maintenance of procedural sedation, but I think it's unlikely to become a drug which would be useful in anesthesia. Even in outer space, there are new compounds. So isovaline is an amino acid which was discovered on meteorites. It seems to have interesting effects in terms of pain and can help to produce general anesthesia in mouse model, along with co-administration of propofol. Perhaps we'll see something along the lines of this. Personalized medicine, of course, is a very important area. We're something that we're very familiar with in our specialty because of things like suxamethonium apnea, MH, and so on. And there's a lot of work going on in this area because it's the development of pharmacogenetics in terms of drugs. So we also have pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, and now pharmacogenetics. It helps us to develop new drugs, and it allows us to administer drugs more safely to patients. So, for example, we would know who is going to be a good responder to a drug, who may be a poor responder, who may have an adverse drug reaction, and so forth, or allergic reaction, and so on. Pain is very heavily influenced by genetics in many different ways, and chronic pain, I think, is an area which I would hope to see some development in the near future in terms of the development of genetic techniques for looking at pain and how we might be able to improve the treatment of chronic pain, because the treatment of chronic pain is really not advanced that much in the last 20, 30 years. And there are a number of genes which are thought to be relevant to pain or analgesia and are being currently investigated for their potential therapeutic benefits. So a number of important areas in understanding pain genes that may help to develop new drugs. Now, in conclusion, it's a very rapid run through, but I think that we're going to see a lot of changes in the near future in anesthesia. Robotics will be important. We hopefully will get better techniques for monitoring anesthesia. We don't even really understand anesthesia all that well. Perhaps we may even unlock the secrets of hibernation and organ protection, which seem to be related to a lot of anesthetic drugs. We're going to be dealing with older patients, although they may be less frail because of better quality of health care. And this emphasis of highlighted of perioperative medicine is going to be extremely important going forward. Personalized medicine, I think we'll see more of that, and better integration between surgery and anesthesia, again, in terms of perioperative medicine, will be important going forwards. Thank you very much.